All right. So, hey everyone, and welcome to the our mission number 4 for the DevOps Hackathon. Let me share my screen and let me also welcome everyone who has joined the session from the Zoom session here. So I see Murli, hi Murli, Michelle, Roland, Santosh, Subramaniam, Tehseen. We may have a few more people join in as well. And more importantly, this time we are also streaming live because we're following a different format from this moment, this session onward for our DevOps hackathon. And we're going to stream it live onto various channels in addition to, doing this on the Zoom. So Zoom, people on the Zoom, the members get the first seat and you have access to our portal and the roadmaps and so on. But we also have people joining in from the Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, Twitter, etc to attend this session, the live part of it, right? And for those of you who are joining here for the first time, this is what we're doing with the DevOps Hackathon. It's a 10 mission, a large 10 mission project, which we're going to run over, let's say, about 90 days. That's our 90 days hackathon here. And here we're building a use case, end-to-end use case by implementing DevOps practices for, a microservices application stack, mission by mission. And we are on the mission number 4. That's what we're going to get started for today. But so far, with mission number 1, we started designing a DevOps solution where we built a high available scalable infrastructure, etc., on cloud for the use case that we had taken. So we went to the use case and built it. That was your task for the mission number 1. Mission number 2 was when you built the solid foundation on Docker. With mission number 3, I have also demonstrated to you how to build a continuous integration pipeline using Jenkins, using Blue Ocean, by writing pipeline as a code using Jenkins file. And how does all of that work? So that's what you've done with mission number 3 by building a continuous integration pipeline. Where I started with the demonstration, then I realized that I believe it is important to talk about a topic, teach and demonstrate during the hackathon session so that you can also follow that by watching the video and also going through the lessons later, which are part of our, challenge and the Ultimate DevOps Bootcamp and the essential series of the courses. So this week, we are going to learn how to automate with Ansible. That's what your task is. That's what your mission is. And you are going to deploy a 3-tier application with Ansible. That's the mission for this week. And then let me also brief you about what comes up next. So next week, we take up building cloud infrastructure on AWS, then automate it with Terraform, build a continuous integration pipeline with Docker and Jenkins integrated. So that's when you'll also learn how to build container images integrated with Jenkins and so on. Then you will deploy the application using the images built here with Kubernetes. And then you set up an automated process to deploy it on Kubernetes using Argo CD, that's GitOps. And then finally, set up the observability system. That completes all the missions which are part of the hackathon. And when you're talking about automating with Ansible as well, you are going to consume the build artifacts that you have created in the previous, as part of previous mission, as part of previous work. And that is when you would have built, let's say, the continuous integration pipelines for a couple of applications, front end, cards, etc. And you will use that because this is, let's say, the build for the cards application, which you will find here. Like this is the cards application. This is part of the package, and you should have already built this artifact and started generating that. Along with that front end application, you may have created jobs to build the artifact, which are also available here. You can also find it from the Blue Ocean UI. This is the newer UI that I have spoken about and demonstrated to you last week. And even here, you will find the artifacts in the artifacts section of your builds as well, right? So you would have started building these artifacts. And these are the artifacts. For example, this is a front-end application packaged, and this is what you are going to deploy. And where do you deploy? How do you do so is where Ansible comes in. And that is what I'm going to explain to you and demonstrate to you this week, right now, right? And I will take the question towards the end of the session. So initially, I will just talk about the topic, demonstrate what is Ansible, how it works, and talk about the concepts related to that. I will demonstrate deploying a 3-tier application to you with Ansible and talk about inventory, playbooks, roles, modules while I do so. And towards the end of the session, I would take questions. Also note that this session will not just be in 1 hour session. It may get extended a little bit or a bit more than normal, because I'll be teaching some concepts and we may need enough time to demonstrate things as well as take questions, and may stop in between as well and digress a little bit here and there. So this is going to be a teaching session. So, but this would be immensely useful for you to clear the concepts related to Ansible. If you have any specific questions if you are on a Zoom call, and if you have specific questions while I'm teaching, you can just unmute yourself and ask it directly, verbally, rather than typing it in, because I may not be watching the questions all the time, or the chat window all the time, right? So stop me if you are in Zoom room, if you have any questions. And towards the end of the session, we'll do another round of questions where, anything else from the previous topics or related to Ansible, we will take it up at that point of time. So this will be more like a webinar kind of a fashion that we would conduct here. So what are we doing here with this week is learn how to automate the infrastructure with Ansible. And Ansible is a great tool to do so. It's a simple yet sophisticated tool. So if I share my journey with infrastructure as a code and automation, I started my journey with Puppet back in 2007. And then I picked up Chef, because Puppet was written in Ruby. It was picked up by Google. It was very popular at that time. Then came Chef in 2009. Chef was a fork of Puppet, basically, not a fork, but people who worked on Puppet, they wanted to do certain things in a different way. And, instead of creating a fork of Puppet, they actually created a new tool, but they were subset of developers of Puppet. So it was written, if you look at Puppet and Chef, both are written in Ruby. And that is the reason, right? So Chef was more sophisticated. Chef became very popular starting 2009 and 10 onwards. And that continued so until around 2013, I believe. 2013, and around that time, I started working on Ansible as part of my consulting gig. And I found it to be very easy coming from Puppet and Chef. It was much, much easier. In fact, Ansible was created by someone who worked at Red Hat, who worked on Puppet Lab later. And, he saw the pain points related to Puppet and Chef, and we wanted to take a simpler approach, and Ansible was born out of that, basically, right? It's a much simpler approach. It uses a push model. It uses SSH, which has been there for years and years. Very reliable way of transport and, connecting remotely to the servers and pushing the changes. And it is yet at the same time, it is sophisticated. So when you want to keep things simple, you have Ansible to do so. When you want to do more sophisticated things, Ansible does support it as well. That's the best part about Ansible, I found. And it became very, very popular. And, if you look at our skills survey or the skills report from the last year, 2022, you will see Ansible is one of the most coveted automation tool in the infrastructure as a code space. Now, Terraform has become more important because of the reason of emergence of containers, basically, because with containers, you don't do application deployment with Ansible necessarily, but it's good to know about how Ansible works at the minimum, right? So because a lot of things in terms of infrastructure configuration, compliance configuration can be done with Ansible even today. But Terraform is definitely another tool you should look out for and learn and pick up, especially considering things are moving towards containers. Ansible may not be as widely used as it used to be, but Terraform will continue to be used for sure, right? But nevertheless, Ansible still has its own place when you're building Kubernetes infrastructures, for example, when you're doing compliance automation. Ansible can be very handy. Now, how does Ansible work? You should look at the conceptual videos about infrastructure as a code and specific features of Ansible, which I'm not going to get into. about what is Ansible really, but how does it work? What are the primitives that it uses? That is what I'm going to talk about here. And how do you automate things with Ansible is what we're going to focus on here. And as part of our project that we have started, we are building or we are going to build, let's say, a 3-tier infrastructure or deploy stuff with Ansible. I'm going to show that to you here. So this is what we have started working on as part of our project. And we have front-end, catalog, and cards, 3 microservices application along with their databases backends. And this is what we have built the continuous integration pipelines for so far. Now we are going to learn how to deploy these applications with Ansible, but really later on, we're going to move to the container-based delivery, right? So right now, we'll understand how it works, how Ansible can be used through that process. But more and more applications are moving towards containers. And in that case, this won't be really always necessary apart from the common system configuration that you may want to push to all the servers. Because let's assume that each of this application, front-end, catalog, cards, is running on its own individual server, individual instance. Now, you still need some basic system configurations to be deployed to that. Even if it is a Kubernetes node, for example, certain configuration related to systems, certain users, certain applications, certain security configurations and policies need to be applied. At that place, Ansible is definitely going to be effective, and that's where it would really keep on shining, right? Not necessarily with application deployment, but I'll show you how you could deploy the application with Ansible as well as part of this today's demonstration. Now, what all do you need to know about if you have to deploy an application configuration as well as system configurations with Ansible? That's what we come to now. And that's our path to automation with Ansible. So what you start with is, let's say you want to deploy a 3-tier application. Let's assume you want to deploy a 3-tier application. There's a load balancer, there's an application server, there is a DB. And each of these is a set of servers. Like you have 3 application servers, 2 database servers, 1 load balancer. You want to configure this. You install the packages, let's say, related to your application, be it a web server like a Node.js, or maybe a Python application where you install the base Python and then you deploy your application, whatever it is. So whatever configurations you need to do, and it has to be repeatable, right? And that is where we start with Ansible primitives. And how does it work? Is basically you start breaking it down into, when you have this kind of a configuration to be done with Ansible, how do you get started? Is you start focusing on one application at a time. So let's just say we pick up application servers. Now, what all things do you need in order to deploy the application, for an application server or a front end? You think about those steps basically. So for example, you want to create a user, you want to install certain application, you want to add some configurations, you want to ultimately start that service, right? So if you come up with the steps, now you start thinking about how do I start doing it with Ansible, and that is where you have each of this step gets converted into something called as a module in Ansible. I'll talk about module specifically, I'll demonstrate those concepts, but module is like a way in Ansible to automate one or write the configuration for a particular entity, like creating a user, for example. There's a module to create a user and manage the user. Now, why to use module? I will demonstrate that to you. But let me show you what I mean by a module. So you see, Ansible has, they call it as a batteries included approach, where you want to automate or manage a certain entity. It could be a user, it could be a package, it could be, let's say, even a volume, it could be a network configuration, it could be anything else that Ansible integrates with. It could also be a cloud server that you can, instead of using Terraform, you can also set up, let's say, AWS EC2 instance or AWS S3. Each of this is, EC2 instance, for example, is one of the modules. So how do you automate or write the configurations for creating an EC2 instance in Ansible is in the form of a module. And this is how it looks like. Like you want to create a EC2 instance and you define that what are the configurations you want to add to the EC2 instance. You want to add a SSH key, the instance type, the image, maybe the VPC subnet that it should be part of, how many instances should be created, should it have a public IP or so on. So you're writing the system configuration by invoking the modules and what we call as writing a playbook. So this is a task that you write, and task is related to how you invoke the modules in Ansible. I'll show you some demo code so that you get a better clarity about it. So if you want to automate application deployment, you come up with the steps, you understand which modules need to be invoked for each of the steps, and then you start writing the code in the form of a task. So what I showed you here is a definition of a task. It's called as a task definition. How do you write it? You write it using YAML. So YAML is a declarative code, and instead of you bothering about how to create a user, how to install the package like apt install or yum install or whatever, you are writing the state of that entity. Like you want to create a user with this configuration, like what should be the UID, what should be the home directory, what should be the password for the user, should it be present or should it be removed, absent or present, what should be the name of the package, what should be the version of the package, should it be installed or not, right? So you write the definition, and each of this task definition invokes a module called as a package, called as a user, called as a template, called as a service, to start a service, to create a user, to install an application. And that goes into a task file. So let's say the reason why we are writing this task is to install the application. So for installing an application, we want to install some base packages, create users, maybe install the actual application package. Then you start the service, add the configurations in between. So you write all those as each of this as a task, and you write it in a file. And that would be YAML file, of course, because all of this is a YAML code. And those kind of task files, so you have an objective for each of the task file. Like, I want to deploy an application with this task file. I want to push configuration with this task file, or I want to do something on top of that with a particular task file, right? So you keep on adding those. And what you do is you take those tasks along with all the supporting files. Like you want to copy some files, you want to add some variables later, because Ansible allows you to, create flexible, reusable, shareable configurations. So you create a directory where you add the task related to your, let's say you create a role, you want to deploy a front-end application, which is a Node.js application, for example. You write all the tasks to install that front-end application here, and you add that in a task directory. Apart from that, if you need any files, if you need any variables, you have their specific directories for that. And all of this is for a particular application called as a front end. And this is what you call as a role. So role is nothing but a modular code. It's a package that you can take to deploy. So if you pull that package and apply, and I'm going to give you a role which is already there, like for deploying a front-end application for the use case that we have. It's already there. So all you have to do is just take that role and apply it on a particular server, particular node, right? And how do you do that is where you have two more things. One is called as inventory. Inventory is like a definition of all the servers that you want to deploy and automate and all the nodes you want to manage with Ansible, right? So what does inventory look like? Inventory has a group of servers, like all my web servers, all my database servers, all my front-end servers, all my Redis cache servers, and so on. So you have classes of servers, and each class, let's say I have 5 instances of Redis. So I will add each line pointing to, oh, this is the IP address of the Redis server. This is another one. This is another one. And how do I connect to it, and so on. And that's what you define as an inventory. So inventory is where you group your nodes, categorize your nodes, add your nodes, define your nodes. And then roles is where you write the code to actually deploy that. Let's say a front-end application has a role, a database like MySQL has a role for itself, and you write that code in the form of a role. And then finally, you create something called as a playbook, which defines which roles or what kind of a code has to be applied to which server. Servers are defined in the inventory. So the mapping between which servers apply what, is called as a playbook. So playbook is where you define the plays, as in you write a playbook to configure your entire application stack, like front end and load balancers and databases. And then your playbook has a play for each. So play will be a sequence of tasks, like, oh, first configure the database, then configure the application, then configure the load balancer. So that goes as part of the playbook. This is an example of a playbook where it starts with a database, applies a MySQL role to the database server. Which host? Those hosts come from the inventory. Which host here? Those host called as web servers or www group. And what roles does it apply? It applies some Java role. It applies a Tomcat role. So you can have different roles, multiple roles applied to one particular server, because it can install Java, install Tomcat. Maybe the same server you want to configure as database, you can apply the database roles to the same. So basically, what to apply to which node, you define that as part of a playbook, and that is how it is going to look like, right? And then you provide those playbooks. So what you define and what you apply is called as a playbook. You give it to the Ansible, and Ansible will automatically, based on which place to be applied to which servers in which sequence, is going to connect to those servers and go and deploy everything for you, right? And that's how Ansible works in a gist. So you should know about playbooks, roles, tasks, modules, inventory, right? And those are the key components. There are many other things like variables and control structures and templates and stuff like that, but we will not get into that right now based on the time that we have. We are only going to keep it to the essential parts where we talk about playbooks, the inventory, the roles, modules, and the tasks and so on, right? And that is what I will be demonstrating to you from here on by setting up Ansible infrastructure for the same application, that we want to deploy here, right? So the same application. So there'll be a front end node. There'll be a server I need for a front end. There will be one for catalog. There will be one for cards, maybe separate instances for databases. So how do we build this infrastructure along with the Ansible control plane as well, right? That's where we have a very interesting tool for you. So I'll show you what I'm going to do here and what I will be demonstrating to you. Just trying to project my screen from my iPad to the laptop. If that doesn't happen in the next few seconds, I will go ahead and start demonstrating right away. So how do we build this kind of an infrastructure with multiple nodes is where we use Docker. So instead of actually setting up like 5 VMs or 6 VMs or 7 VMs and so on, we can actually use Docker to do so. And on top of that, we in-house have built some tool, including with Docker and some script and Docker Compose, where you can set this up very quickly. And this is a Docker Compose code for that, which already might have set up. If you have completed the mission number 3, you would have set up the Jenkins, and there is one more instance along with Jenkins, which you may have already set up. If not, I will show you here. So bootcamp setup. This is part of our Ultimate DevOps Bootcamp, which you have access to if you are a member already. And the setup includes a Docker Compose script, which includes, let's say, there is Jenkins and a Docker instance, which you may have set up. But apart from that, when I want to build this infrastructure, like front-end, catalog, cards, and so on, I have containers to run each of this as well. So there is a control node which would act like my Ansible controller, because Ansible would be installed in one node, and from there it will connect to each of these nodes there. So there's a control node, then there is front-end, catalog, cards. Even the DB, cards DB, has its own node. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 nodes would come up as containers, and it is all defined as part of this Docker Compose YAML. So you don't have to worry about it too much. All you have to do is have Docker installed, download the code, and just run Docker Compose up -d, and that brings up all these things like control cards, front end, each of these runs as a container, which you can see here now. It has just come up, and I can see control. There is front end, there is catalog, cards, and the cards DB. The 5 containers created, and this is amazing. I mean, because this simplifies your setup actually part. So all you need is Docker, and if you pull this in, we call it as code spaces, and this is our in-house tool again. And this will simplify your multi-node setup. So you actually get a multi-node setup, but all done with Docker. It's just that you need a little larger infrastructure. For example, I started setting all of this up on a server which had 2 GB of Linux server with 2 GB and 2 cores. Initially, that slowed it down, so I had to resize it to 2 core and 4 GB. So it seems to take more memory because there's Jenkins and a lot of builds happening along with what we are doing here. So 2 cores I found to be enough, but 4 GB RAM was needed for me to set all of this up, including Jenkins and let's say Ansible and related infrastructure. So at least during this part where you're setting up Ansible, I would recommend you try with the largest instance. If you're using DigitalOcean, for example, 2 core or 4 GB or equivalent in any other cloud or on your local system, that's what you would need in order for this to work properly. So what happens when you set this up is it comes up, let's say this Ansible controller. How can I access it? And it comes with a built-in code editor along with a terminal. So this is a very interesting tool. So you basically go to your 8000 port wherever you're running it. If it is localhost where you're running Docker environment, just localhost:8000, and it will show up like this. And from here, you can open a terminal. So I've already opened a terminal that you see on here where I have Ansible installed. So I do see Ansible. So you don't have to install anything. All that is ready. All that is available. And you can start using it right away with the code that I'm going to share with you. Right. So Ansible -- version shows me the version details for Ansible. It's 2910. Not the most latest, but that is fine. So all the concepts and the key primitives you should know are already here in this version of Ansible as well. And I'm going to open the workspace where I'll have to clone my code. So where do I clone the code from is the same repository that you use for this setup, which is this Ultimate DevOps Bootcamp, UDBC. So github.com/UDBC Bootcamp. And this has Ansible repository here. So I will clone this as is. From here, I have this directory available, and then I would open that in the workspace that I see here. So click on open workspace, go to Bootcamp. I can open Bootcamp, but I will go to Ansible directly and click on open. So I see my Ansible code, which is what I'm going to explain to you. So this is the Ansible code that you will see once you have the workspace open. And it's in the same directory that I've opened the terminal in. So basically, let me refresh this, close the files that I have opened. This is the environment. You see the workspace on the left, yeah, with the code. So you don't have to write all the code by yourself. You're just learning how to use Ansible to deploy stuff. And that's when I said it is okay to not dive too deep into Ansible, but at least essentials of Ansible are very, very important for everyone, right? And that's what you would learn through this particular hackathon and the course that is Ultimate DevOps Bootcamp and Ansible Essentials, where you learn how to apply, where you learn all the key primitives starting with inventory, etc. So I have Ansible installed along with this. So this is just one node that I see here, but behind this, there are 4 more nodes which are running as containers. So what is this kind of a setup that you get here, right? So when you deploy this, you have Ansible control node is where my Ansible is running. And that ID that you see here, right? So that ID with, the code and the terminal is all running here. And then behind it, there are 4 more nodes. There is front end, there is catalog, there is cards, and then there is a cards DB. All of these are containers. So this is the environment that you got. Along with, of course, you have Jenkins running with it. So you're going to pull something from Jenkins and deploy it to some of these servers, etc. And from Ansible, you would connect to these servers and start managing and pushing the configuration. This is like a realistic environment, just a small scale and a lightweight environment, and it is created using a very quick method here. And you get everything. It's an integrated environment with IDE, Ansible installed, and all these nodes are configured as well. So I can actually show you by connecting to some of these front end, for example. And I'm connected to front end. It's not running anything right now. There is any name that you see here, catalog, for example. I can connect to that, right? So there are many such nodes. And how do I start automating these with Ansible is where I need to first define an inventory and maybe Ansible configurations. I'll show you where it is defined and how an inventory would look like and what is an inventory. So this is my Ansible configuration. Along with everything else, it has an inventory configuration, which says, this is where my inventory is. Where is the inventory? In this directory called as environments by name dev. Now, this is my style. This is a style where I would use environments directory. And then this is a pattern, basically. So you can create your own styles here. And the one I use is by creating a directory called as environments. And within that, for every environment like dev, prod, stage, I would create one file, and that would be my inventory for that particular environment. If I have to define a static inventory like this, there is also a concept of dynamic inventory where Ansible integrates with your tool like AWS CLI and APIs, and then gets the inventory details automatically by pulling those over an API. We're not talking about that. We're keeping it simple. We have a static inventory. And this is how my inventory looks like. Inventory file that you see, where I have a front end. So exactly what I showed you in the picture earlier, there is a front end node with this IP address, and it defines how to connect to it, right? So all of that is, you can define keys, you can define passwords. Since this came with passwords, so, or it has a passwordless access now. So even this may not be needed. But this is definitely needed. So how do you connect what IP address or what host name for the catalog cards? And this could be multiple. So if you have, let's say, multiple front-end servers that you want to manage, you can add as many as you want here, right? And it would connect to it when I try using front-end as a name from the inventory. How does that work? I'm going to show you. So I have front-end catalog cards, and then I also have another category called as dev, where dev sort of invokes all these groups, front-end catalog cards. So when I say dev, it would connect to all of these, right? So how does this inventory work, and how do I connect to these hosts is where I use some host patterns. So I'll show you that. So let me use Ansible to connect to one of these hosts or the front-end host. So how do I do that? So I use Ansible followed by the pattern. This is called as a host pattern. Host pattern comes from the inventory. And then I would say, I'll just say hello. So -m ping is typically how I do that. And this returns a pong reply. So ping pong is, how it works. So it sends ping, it receives pong. So that means, and if it returns that, it means it is able to connect using SSH and so on. So all that connection, all the inventory configuration is all correct. And I can show you some patterns here. So instead of front end, I will say catalog. So it will connect to that particular server. So look at the IP address that is different now, that is connecting to catalog. I can connect to dev, which will call all the servers. So if I say dev, it invokes all the servers from this inventory because it added front end, catalog, cards, all of those, right? So you see that here being called for 3 nodes here, or you can use some wildcards like all. All will bring in everything in the inventory that is currently configured, plus maybe the local host as well. So it's not been configured here in the inventory. So all is everything in the inventory, right? So that's what you see being used here as well. And you can also use some patterns like, oh, I want to use dev, but but not a certain type of a server like front end. You can add that as the filters. So you can have different types of filters. You can use different combinations of combining or excluding certain types of servers or hosts from the inventory, right? But I'll keep that discussion to it. So that is an inventory. So you see an inventory being configured, and you can see how you can get started by automating stuff using Ansible. And Ansible, you can, of course, write the playbooks and automate. That's the right way to do it. But you can also do some ad hoc things. Like sometimes you just want to install something quickly on all the servers, or get status of something on from all the servers. You can use Ansible for these kind of ad hoc managements as well. So if you look at, Ansible has become significant for the system management, system administration purposes, actually. Because if you look at RHCE certificate, Red Hat certified, system engineer, Linux engineer, etc. So earlier, it used to do a lot of there were manual activities, script and all that, but now it is completely based off Ansible for automation. So system configurations automation, Ansible is very useful. So you can be a system admin, you can be a ops guy, and you want to manage things at scale or push something at scale. You can do that with Ansible. How so? Let me show you that. So I can say Ansible all, and then check what is the uptime on all the servers, right? I may want to quickly check the performance, how if any system is behaving abnormally. I can do that with Ansible, right? And you can also do things like installing an application like normally you would do, right? So let's say apt install and some application like this. You can do that with all. Now, for installing an application, you need a sudoers access, right? So it's not, it doesn't have a sudoers access right now, and that's what it is complaining about right now. So I can add that. Earlier there were different options. Now it is -b. -b is for become. You can become sudoers, but there are other things that you can do now as well. But I'm trying to use just the sudoers, which is default, and this installs it. Now, while I can do this in an ad hoc way like this is not always the right way of automating. I'll tell you why. Because let's take an example of creating a user. This is not very intelligent. So let's say user add and ABC. It does that right now because there was no user by name ABC. Let me show you that. It has created that user called as ABC. Yeah. Let me create one more user, ABCD. Check whether it is present first. It's not. And let me create it now, ABCD. The user is created, which I can verify. So it does this thing, sure, but it's not the right way of automating with Ansible, because what happens now is very interesting. So if I run this again, the same user creation, again, it throws an error. There's an error code. It's non-zero, so it is an error. So why this happens is because the user was already present. And even if you go to a node, and try to do this, it says already exists, right? So only when you're doing it for the first time, it would have returned you the zero exit code. Yeah, so that is the nature of the system. So whatever the system returns, it is basically taking that and doing it, just returning whatever the status is. Now, if you're doing this in an automated way, if you want to do this at scale, and if you want to make sure that you don't get any errors while, because you're going to run Ansible most of the time in an automated way, you don't do ad hoc tasks most of the time. You are going to use something called as module. This is where modules would shine, because when you start using Ansible's own subsystem for automation, there is a lot of intelligence. I'll show you how. So let's take a module called as user, and I'll do the same thing, but with an Ansible module. So if I had to write a task, it would have looked like this, but I'm not writing a task. I'm just doing it via the command line console right now. Later on, we can add it as a task as well. So instead of doing this, I will invoke a module. So this time I'll invoke a module called as user. This is the name of the module. So how do I call a module from Ansible is use -m and user. And then to the module, I wouldn't provide a command like this, but I would provide details of what I want. Now I use a declarative code, like what should be the name of the user, what should be the state of the user. I can find all of these things from here. So the name of the user, which is a string, state, there is a default state which is present, but you can also have absent for removing a user. So let me add that code to create a user. Let's say user is equal to ABC. Let's see what happens. State is equal to present. Now I'm being more declarative, and user is already present. I've shown you that. So it says it changed because it might have modified some other properties based on what Ansible does by default. But if you see it from now onwards, it doesn't throw an error even if the user is present. And I can then create a user. I can remove a user using absent, and it knows what to do. If it is present, it will remove. If it is not present, it will not do anything. It will skip over. It will say unchanged. Changed is false. Earlier it was true. And if I look at the command to verify that user, ABC it is, it's not present. ABCD is, let me remove that user and show you. So I can say remove this particular. So this is idempotent. This is called as idempotence, where it knows what to do when. So if the user is present, it will it will remove it in this case. If it is not there, it will not do anything. It will just skip over. Also, if the user is present, but if you change just the UID, if you change just the password, it uses user mod and not user del to remove, user mod to modify, user add to add. So which command to use and when to use it, when to skip it. So all that logic is built into this module subsystem. And that is where the Ansible's declarative code and interface comes in. So you write the code, and we can take this code and write it in the form of a YAML. And that is what makes up a play or a task, which goes as part of a role and so on, which is more like an organization thing. But you can also add it to a playbook like this and say, apply this, and it will go and do that for you as well. Right? That's what a module is. So module has that intelligence, and module is what you use to automate things with Ansible. So if you want to automate anything, like I showed you a few examples like users and EC2 instances, and there are so many modules, and that is where Ansible's batteries included approach comes in, because unlike other tools like Puppet and Chef, where you have to go search for additional cookbooks or roles or modules in Puppet and cookbooks in Chef, here everything is built in. So you want to automate cloud provisioning with, let's say, AWS. You have so many modules already available with Ansible. How many modules are there? Let's find out. With this particular version of Ansible that we have, there are Ansible doc-l shows you a list of modules. There are just tons of those. So I'm just going to get a number using word count, WC-L. There are 3387 modules which are built into Ansible. Imagine that, right? Those many objects can you automate, and you don't have to worry about, oh, how do I create an EC2 instance? How do I call the EC2 APIs? No, that is needed. That is where Python's library come in because it relies on this library called as Boto. So if you have installed Python, if you have installed Boto, it will automatically work. If you have provided credentials, of course, how do you provide credentials is given here. And after that, if you have the access, rights, authorization, you can just write the code like this and it will translate into an actual cloud infrastructure for you. That is how Ansible works. That's where the tasks come in. And to organize the task, you have roles, and the rules to apply which roles on which nodes, you have the playbooks. That's where the playbooks and roles come in. Now, I will show you quickly how do I configure this front-end application. I'll build one thing at a time. So initially front-end, then I'll add a catalog. Cards, when I tested it a few minutes ago, had some issues. So we need to fix that. But front-end comes up fine, and catalog does come up fine as well. So these two, I will demonstrate and show you how this comes up and work now, right? So I will, first deploy the front end, and even before that, I will add some system configurations. I'll show you how playbooks apply. So let's say I want to apply some common configuration to all the systems. So I have a playbook for that. Let me just walk you through this. So there is a common playbook here. You can see the code in the top, and playbook contains a mapping between which hosts and what code to apply. Which host comes from where? Where do you think the host come from? You can type it in the chat. The hosts, we have defined it as part of the inventory. That's right. Yeah, so inventory is the correct answer. So inventory is where the host come from. So which host is front end, catalog, cards, whatever. When you look at the common configuration, they need to be applied to all. So like the keyword I used here in the bottom to connect to all, that's what defines here. I also used -b when I used Ansible commands earlier, like all -b for become. That is the configuration here. And then I applied a role called, I want to apply a role called as common. Now, I'm not getting in depth into the role, but role is a way to organize your code, like your tasks and supporting files and templates and variables and whatnot. So there is a common role here with certain tasks. Task is the main part. And what are the tasks here? It will install certain packages, and it will install an application called as supervisor, which can be used to start services. So what packages? It is given in their respective operating systems. So let's say Debian, environment Debian here, and packages Debian. So here I'm using some logic. So its actual packages are defined in as a list somewhere here. So let's say defined in a variable. There are many ways to define the variables. That's what I teach in the Ansible Bootcamp, which is a detailed course, which is available as part of the, let's say, the gold membership with School of DevOps. But this is the list of packages. So what are the packages to be installed? Should be somewhere in here. So these are the packages, common packages. So this is a array of packages, which is what I'm providing to a package module. A package module comes from here. It should be a part of packaging modules. So there are many modules, but there is one high-level module called as a package that you can use actually. Instead of using apt and yum and different ones for different operating systems, you can use this package module and say that I want to install this particular package called as NTP date, or I want to install a package whose name comes from a variable. This is a way to invoke the variable. You can also define multiple packages as a list. Essentially, this is what I'm doing, just that instead of defining the packages list in the task itself, I'm calling it from the variable. So I define the variable separately. There are many of these, and this is what I call from, let's say if I look at the common role, this is what I say, use apt in this case, but I can use package here. And then the list of packages comes from the common.packages and maybe additional packages that I can define later and so on. So I can use apt, I can use package. Either of that would work for me. And this is part of my common configurations which I want to apply. So if I go back to the common playbook, so I apply the playbook that will call this common role, which will install everything. And this will install on all the nodes. So let me show you how that would work. So in this case, I would call Ansible playbook. Common.yaml is the playbook name here. That's what we apply. You apply the playbook typically when you apply the code with Ansible. And before applying, I can check what are the hosts it would apply on. What are the tasks it would configure, right? It is going to install the packages, set up some path configuration, any custom paths that I add. It will start some service called a supervisory, which will actually start rest of the services when I configure later. And this goes on all the nodes. And let me go ahead and apply this common.yaml. There is a way to do syntax check and also dry run, but I'm skipping that part in the interest of time and showing you how to apply this. So this is going to create the common configurations on all my nodes, all the nodes that I have, like, the front end, catalog, cards. There are 3 of those. And you can see it is installing or running it one task at a time, one task in parallel. So it goes to one task, completes it, takes the next task, applies it to all 3 nodes in parallel, and then is collecting or waiting for the status from each of the node. Until that task is finished, it will wait. That's how Ansible works actually. So it is one task at a time that it executes from the playbook. Okay, are there any questions so far from anyone in the Zoom call? All right, you can stop me anytime if you have questions.
Yeah, Gaurav, Tehsin here.
Yeah, Tehsin.
So it performs one task at a time, but I believe, does it start executing on all hosts?
Yes, all hosts in the inventory.
Basically the
so you can see
execution.
It is a parallel when it comes to that task. So when it goes to this task, it is running parallelly on all 3. This is the same task. This is the same task, which is in report. It's collecting the report from all 3, right? So it is running in parallel on all 3, task by task. You can change that behavior, by the way. There's some configuration for it, but this is how it works. But it parallelizes on the nodes when it goes to that task. When it goes to the next task, it is this is taking time because it's installing packages, which generally takes time. But otherwise, there's parallel execution in place here. All right. So how are the IPs set? Like we're running on a desktop? That's the question from Subramaniam that I see in the chat. Yes, go ahead with the question.
Yeah, Gaurav. So in the automation process, how to add new servers added in scale up and scale down, right?
Sure. So we are not looking at that right now. We are looking at what is it. Is your question about the inventory where you want to add those servers automatically when you scale up, scale down on a cloud?
Yeah.
Okay. For that, you have a concept called as, let's say, dynamic inventory. So what are we doing right now? Let me talk about that. So what is an inventory? How do you configure it, right? So where is Ansible looking up for the servers, a list of servers, right? That is the question here. Right now, we have a static inventory defined locally. Let's say the one you see in the green. What happens if you are on a cloud and when you're in auto scaling and cloud servers get auto scaled and so on? So what you do in that case is simply you use dynamic inventory, where Ansible will be configured to query the EC2 by using APIs. And it has that, there's a script to do that. You don't have to write anything, you just have to integrate that. And then it becomes dynamic, where the actual list of servers comes from the AWS at the beginning of the run. So that is dynamic. So however many servers, let's say 3 servers got added and 1 got deleted from the previous list, it will reflect in the inventory automatically when you run the Ansible code on, let's say, AWS servers there. So that's possible. You can configure the something called as a dynamic inventory for that. All right. So another question about how the IPs are set here for these nodes is, it's the static configuration right now. It is all defined in the Docker Compose. So if you look at Docker Compose, when I create front end, for example, what IP should it create? I have defined it here so that, it becomes easy for me to have it be coded in my inventory for the purpose of this class, right? Because that makes it easier. If it is changing constantly, then it becomes a bit of a challenge. You can still use it with this because this is Docker and Docker Compose. So Docker Compose has some DNS discovery, but it is easy to understand when you have IP addresses like this, because that's how you configure your real life nodes as well. So that's why I've defined the IPs, and the IPs come from this file, which is used then to create these nodes. I'll show you for this, just for the sake of it, understanding, I will show you by adding one more node. All right, I'm going to add one more node here. It's very straightforward, not very complex. So let's say just like cards or just like catalog, I want to add one more service to this. Okay, I'll change the name to ABC. Let's call it as Redis. Okay, I want to introduce Redis caching. So I'll also bring in image. Since it is Redis, I have an image that I can bring in.
Just a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, because I just noticed that we don't have the database for the catalog.
Database for the catalog is not there. I think in this one right now, there's a static binary that I'm deploying for the purpose of this demonstration and the course.
I see.
But it can be a database, like cards has a database backend where we do some configuration. I think that's where things are breaking a little bit. But it is possible to have a database configured for the catalog as well.
I see. So for the catalog, we're using in memory.
I have to go back and check how I'm doing it right now, because I just looked at it after a while, but it does work. So it is statically serving the catalog. It's not using a database right now, as of now, I can tell you.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's say this is what I want to add as another service. I'm just keeping everything as is and just changing a name. And then I will have to change the IP address as well. So I'll add 43, some random IP, the last bit, and give it a name Redis dot something. And yeah, that's it. So Docker Compose is quite dynamic in this way. So you can see Docker Compose PS shows Redis now, should show, but it's not, it has not come up yet. Okay, let's do up -d. And it started Redis. Now, if I look at it, it has this server. And then I can actually do this where I go back to inventory. Let's say environment dev. I have one more category of servers, or let's just say catalog server. I have one more of that, 192.168. So everything will remain same except for the IP, which is ending 43. So it would actually have it configured. So Ansible, Redis is my, or catalog is the category or a class of server I want to manage. And then I do ping. Yeah, it should work. So it's very easy to add nodes. Not a big deal, right? So, and this is the Docker-based setup. So if you just use the same image because it has been configured in a special way, like this one, node image, you can add as many nodes as you want and configure it however you want it. And if I remove it from the inventory for the Ansible, it's not visible anymore. It may be there, but it's not visible to the Ansible. That's what I mean. I can also remove it from here by running docker compose stop redis followed by remove. Or rm-f would have worked possibly. Yeah, that's the end of Redis, and you can add nodes, remove those as you wish. Okay, so I just applied that common configuration, which installed certain packages and whatnot. And now I will configure one service at a time, starting with front end. Front end again is a Node.js application. So if you look at the front end playbook for the front end, it says you run this first, this role, which is common, which has already been applied. Then there is a role for Node.js that is going to configure the Node.js, the actual Node.js. And then there is a role which will deploy the front-end application on top of the Node.js. Let me show you maybe the role for Node.js and then the front-end. The front-end role is here. Node.js role is here. If you look at the Node.js role, it will just be about installing Node.js. So download Node.js, a specific version which is needed for our application, create some symlinks and stuff like that, right? There is a, I think YAL is an installer for Node.js. So something on that, or process manager for Node.js, I think. So it's one of that. And that is being installed. So this installs and configures the base Node.js. On top of that, there is another role which will come in and deploy the actual application. Now that actual application has its own logic. So we build or download the release artifact. Where does the release artifact come from? The release artifact will come from my Jenkins itself. Now this is where, when you're doing this yourself as the project and the practical activity, you should have a pipeline for building a front end as part of a previous task. And that is what you see here. And this generates an artifact. And this is an artifact you're going to provide to Ansible. How would you do that? Let me show you that. So I'll go back to this classic UI on Jenkins. Here I have front end, master. This is my artifact. And I want to pull any last successfully built artifact. This is where I can pull this URL from. And I copy over the link like this. And then where do I add it is because this front end uses a variable. So it says download the release artifact from a front end release URL. Front end release URL is a variable. Where is it defined? All my variables are in group vars that I want to change. There are many places where you can define the variables. One of that is group vars, and the front end, all the group variables for front end are here. That is the front end release URL. Right? The front end release URL is what is defined in the group variables here. So I would have to provide this variable here. How do I do it? Let me show you that. For the front end, Jenkins is available as a local instance using name Jenkins. This is because of Docker and this setup that you have already. So when front end or the control plane or front end wants to connect to any of these nodes like Jenkins, it can connect using this name directly called as Jenkins. Where is it defined? How is it configured? Is whatever you see in this file is available as the name, like Jenkins, for example. So if I go to or get into front end, and try to ping Jenkins, ping command is not there, so I can't use that. Can I use it from here? No, the ping itself is not there. So I may have to install the ping util. I think there is some utility there. But if I have that, I would discover that it can connect to this, maybe use ns lookup. Even that command is not there. So all these network utilities are not there because it's a stripped down version of a container that we are using in this image. But if you install those network utilities, it would show like that. So it can resolve to any of these nodes like Jenkins internally. And that is why we keep this as is. The only thing that we have to change is the path. So because if you go and check here now, this URL path. So it is going to connect to it not using this IP or something like localhost. It will use Jenkins, but this path is what you need to copy. And let's say paste here, this part after the initial URL. And then the version should be same here as well. So 001 is what I will add. Why am I doing this is because my code here, I'm not asking you to write the code here. That's not what the purpose is. We want to keep it simple right now. We are relatively simple, I would say. And I just want you to explore this, how it works and how Ansible works, how you deploy stuff with Ansible. And that's where as part of the front-end role, for example, which will automatically download that release artifact and deploy it on the server. How does it do that? I will show you. And right now, if I go to this URL for my Docker instance and go to the AT port, there is nothing. This is pointing to the front-end server. I will configure this with Ansible and show you what happens at the end of it. So I'm applying the front-end playbook. What this does, it connects to the instance which is on the Docker container, which has been configured as a front end. It will deploy this application there. So it will deploy this application, configure all the tasks using Ansibles from the playbook. So playbook is calling the role like what roles it is calling. Let's see, the front end playbook calls common roles. It will apply common configuration, install Node.js, and then finally deploy the front end application. So it is looking at the common configuration. We applied this earlier, so it just skips over. It says okay for everything because it's nothing to install this time. All those base configurations have been pushed already. So the common configuration will just sail through. Then it starts with the Node.js. This is the time it started with the Node.js configuration. That is another role. Installs it, there is a error. This is expected. So since it is an expected error, I have already added an ignore configuration here. So it will ignore that part and it will proceed. Otherwise, it will, when it fails, it will stop right there. We don't want that. So it's proceeding now with all the rest of the configuration where it's deploying the front end. It pulled that from the release artifact from Jenkins. So this will work only when you have added this URL, changed it in this configuration that I showed you, here. I show this as part of the video lesson, but this is an important thing you should remember. So change this part with whatever you see. So you must have a CI pipeline first, otherwise it won't work. We are doing in step by step. That's why we are going in step by step. So it is all sequential. So the front end configuration has gone through. If I apply it one more time, it's just going to show me everything has been done. Last time it showed me that there were 11 tasks which changed, 18 were unchanged, 1 was ignored. And now if you look at the configuration or the run right now, it'll say almost everything is just done. It'll say okay for everything. Okay, are there any questions so far?
Yeah, Gaurav, Yasin again.
Let us see.
I have one question. Like Ansible is push based, right? I mean,
Correct.
controller node is pushing the state
To the front end node.
manage nodes. So let's say the situation is that a node is spinned up, maybe as part of auto scaling group or something like that. So how do we handle the state of those servers? Because that will be spinned up independently, and controller node doesn't have the details of, basically the host file doesn't have the details of that node, the newly spinned node. So in
Correct.
that case, how is that handled?
I think I've already just answered that. That's a dynamic inventory part, where if you have configured the dynamic inventory, it would automatically pull the list of new servers. And there'll be categories by tags and stuff like that. So you can pick in your inventory or host pattern, you will add that particular pattern and say these type of servers, like web servers, like front end, for example. You would have tagged it in AWS as well as front end. And if it comes up with that tag, it would pull that and apply it. And you provide it in the host pattern here. This is a host pattern where you will define that, saying that all the front end nodes, where is the inventory? Inventory will be configured dynamically. So your ansible.conf, instead of inventory this, it will basically say inventory is equal to this script ec2.py. So it will call that script and that will get the list of servers, and that's what will be used as an inventory. So dynamic inventory is the answer.
That is script is running, I mean, with some frequency or that, or
every time you run Ansible playbook, when it is needed, because that's when you need to know which host, right? So it runs when you run Ansible playbook. It will refresh at that time.
But again, it's an action from control server, right?
Control server, that's right. Inventory is needed on the control server only.
So when it is run, it will have the detail of that node, but not from the node side.
What do you mean not from the outside?
Basically, a new server is spinned up. That server has to reach to some state. Correct. And the action is not being taken from the server side.
Correct.
So there has to be some recurring frequency to run the playbook from the control node.
That's right. Since it is a push model, not a pull model, you can make Ansible run in a pull model, by the way. So you can also make it as part of your, let's say, add it to your user data to install Ansible and configure things and stuff like that. There's a way to make it pull model, but since Ansible is primarily a push model, it is not going to automatically start when your node comes up. So if you want that configuration to be automatically be done, you have to have the image with certain configuration, and then Ansible pushes it later, whatever rest of the configuration, wherever it runs, you'll have to wait for that much time, or you'll have to ensure that wherever an auto scaling activity happens, you basically you trigger the Ansible execution, or you have to make it in configure Ansible in a way that it works like a pull model, where it comes up along with the node itself, the initial configuration, using Ansible playbook. You can also use a combination of all these, where initially you run it as user data, and later on Ansible controller takes over for rest of the configuration updates from there on. So it is a matter of design actually, but since it is not like Puppet or Chef, which is more like pull, and it will automatically, when the node comes up, it knows how to connect to the server and pulls it automatically. It doesn't work that way by nature, I mean.
Okay, I get that. Thanks.
Sure. Now, I showed you by applying it again as well. So you see this time, everything is in OK state. One is skipped for that, one of the tasks here, which has already been done, I think. So now what do I see here is, if I refresh this page where I was seeing nothing, I see the front-end interface here. This is the actual front-end application. Now, this is a microservice application stack. So you don't see any product because there is no catalog service running. This is the front end. All you see is the front-end application rendered. Everything else will show up when you add more services like catalog, for example, cards, for example, and so on. So this is when I deploy the rest of the services. So this will work. I will go and configure the catalog service. Before that, let me show you what happened with front-end node. So if I go to the front-end node, now that Ansible is run, everything has been configured. You see a supervisor D, which is a process manager, has come up. That has started node application, and that is what you see here. So this is the actual node application which is being rendered with the server.js JavaScript page and so on that you see here. And that is what is being served by Node.js right now. It still is not connected to the backend application because there are no backend applications right now for you to show catalog, etc. So let me add one more again by running Ansible. And this time I will say I want a catalog service to be created. If I look at the catalog playbook, it does the common configuration. It deploys a database. So yes, this is to correct my earlier thing. It's not a sort of a static file. There's a database running on the same node right now. That's a MySQL database, runs locally on the same node, and then a catalog service will come up, which will connect to the MySQL database in the backend, the same node. And this catalog application is a Golang application. It has been compiled and it will be deployed. And if you want to go and look at how it does that, you can explore the catalog playbook here. So how does it deploy? How does it set up the database? So it also sets up the database, by the way. So it does it in that order. So it will deploy the catalog, it will deploy. So this is where you have to complete the task. This is part of your project activity, that you complete these tasks. And if you want to jump to the code which is already running, you'll see now that it will start throwing some errors after deploying database, because database probably comes up. So it is calling the database first, then it will deploy the application, try to deploy that. So it is pulling the database application, which is compiled and available here actually. So it is not gone to that. So since this is supposed to be part of an exercise, you're supposed to complete it, or I'll show you where to find the code. Because, depending on the time complexity, it might make sense for you to just pull the code which is working and use that. To do so, there is a branch here. So if you want to get the code for, the complete code for Ansible, for example, if you go and look at the role, since we don't go in depth into the role, we will do that during the Ansible bootcamp, a detailed bootcamp later. So let's say catalog here. These tasks are not complete. So not all of these are complete, right? This is part of an exercise. So if you want to skip over, you can go to a step X. That is one of the branches which has the actual code. That's what I'm doing here now. This is more like a shortcut that I want to take. If you want to still use this as an exercise, you can still continue and do that. So just throwing away keeping the changes away using git stash, and then I brought in the changes which has working code. Everything is working. This is only one thing which I will fix for you anyways. The URL for actual application, and then I will apply the catalog application. Fixing it here as well. So this has already been done. So it doesn't do that one more time, the restore database. It does everything else. The catalog service has started. It takes time. So first time you run it, it may throw an error. Later on, it would work. If I run this again, it has come up already, actually. I'm just running it one more time to ensure that everything is working. So this is part of common playbook. Then comes the MySQL and then the catalog. So MySQL, it has already deployed everything here. Nothing to be done. So it will either say okay or skipping. And then static assets are the images, etc. It downloads it from a URL and it starts the service. So as a result of it, what I see is in addition to the front end, the catalog shows up. That's when you see the actual pictures and the catalog, and you can filter and whatnot, right? And see this description as well. So this is the catalog part. If I click on add to cart, it doesn't show the cart yet because there is no shopping cart service, and that's the third service you're supposed to deploy here. Not getting into that, but it's a similar process that you use to run Ansible playbook with the cards application, and that is supposed to what gets you, let's say, the cards, configured. That's the third application configured along with the cards and the database, etc., and so on. So that's the idea. And this is the entire playbook. So you can also combine all these playbooks like this. So saying that, oh, go and configure the front end first, then configure the catalog, then configure the cards, and maybe just deploy the application. This is for deploying the application. You can run selective things on selective applications as well. And that's what happens here. So this has some issue, I believe. So cards may or may not run right now, but you at least see two of these services come up with Ansible, and I have deployed that using the Ansible playbook. So just to recap what we did here and how we would go about deploying an application like this with Ansible and automating everything with that is you have the node configurations. Like this is how it's going to look like. There's a front end, there's a catalog, and then the cards app. Each of this may have a database in the backend. And then you approach it one class of server at a time, and you would add that as an inventory. And I've already explained you this code where you define the inventory with a list of host classes of servers like front end, catalog, cards. That's what I demonstrated, showed you. This is our inventory, similar to what you have seen me using. And then what you define is a role for each of these classes of servers. Like front end has a Node.js role and a common, maybe a front end role on top of that, a catalog role and a common here. There's a MySQL role for the database, etc. And then you map those, you write the code, the actual roles will contain the tasks. Task will have, let's say, the actual modules being invoked, etc. And then you create a role for each of the application like front end and catalog and whatnot. And then each of the task file looks like this. I've shown you this: user, packages, each of the entity goes as each task, and that invokes a module. This is the Ansible module, which will actually configure your infrastructure. For example, each of these steps will invoke each of these modules, like user module to manage the users, package module for installing the applications. Configurations are typically pushed via something called as templates. the question from Subramaniam about catalog is a jar file. Yes, it is a jar file. It comes from one of the URLs. I think that's where this is failing. Download the cards artifact, because I think where this is failing is URL. So I need to have a similar URL. So just like this, there's a cards package application which has this URL. If I copy this over and update this part, correct the URL here, and apply, it would proceed. It would progress from there. So that's where it is. That's when I told you earlier for the front end as well. This is what would happen if you don't have the right URL relative to where the Ansible controller is. It's going to pick it up from Jenkins and then provide the right URL. And once you do, it starts downloading and configuring and all that. So the service still is failing because of some other reasons, but this is how we can fix the issue with the URL. Coming back to the code and the approach, you write the task, call the modules. And this is how your task definition looks like. And those tasks go as part of the roles. And then once you have the roles defined, you finally write the playbooks. Each of the one or more playbooks. Now, I showed you by invoking 3 different playbooks for 3 different applications like front end, cards, and catalog. But you can just have one playbook or one main playbook which invokes each of these plays, and each of the play consists of the mapping. This is one play basically. This is just one play, and mapping between which host apply what. So if I had to create one large playbook, I could have just done it this way. And had taken maybe this plus this plus catalog. That will work. I can apply this site.yaml as is right now, and it's gonna just go and run those 3 different plays in one go. So instead of running it separately, you can just put it in one place. You can in fact have the files be imported as well, saying that, include files, this, that, and the other, right? Just like I have here, import tasks. So you can have import playbooks, import plays, and define each of these playbooks and whatnot. So that's how a playbook looks like. So playbook is a mapping between which host apply what roles. It could be roles, it could be tasks directly. Instead of writing the task, you just write it as roles, basically, right? And that's what the playbooks are made up of. And that's what you feed into the Ansible, and that configures your infrastructure. And that's what I showed you here, then the bottom. So you provide that playbook to Ansible, and that configures your, like entire infrastructure. In this case, it's just going to run all these plays in that sequence that I have in this site.yaml. Like first configure the front end, then the catalog, then then the cards. So, right now it says catalog, but it can be cards, and it's just going to apply it in that sequence. That's how you start automating with Ansible. And that is part of your agenda. If you look at the challenge, how do you get started with the challenge? You have now, I have created this for this challenge, right? For this week's mission 4, how do you get started? What are the things you have to complete, etc. If you go to club.schoolofdevops, there is a roadmap already there. I'll add a separate section for the challenges, but there is a roadmap already here. And if you look at this roadmap, it does have this DevOps Associate is what we are working on, and system engineering batch, and then DevOps Hackathon challenge. If you look at this challenge, there are missions still in work in progress, but you see 10 missions added. And you should have seen this been checked off. Once you have completed all the steps of mission number 3, this would have been all like marked, grayed out basically. And then step number 4 or mission number 4 is here. And this will tell you how to get started with it. So you start by reading this, agenda for mission number 4 that tells you where to go and what to do for that week. complete Ansible Essentials course, which is important prerequisite that is going to help you understand how this setup works, how to deploy the setup part here, then the inventory, modules, roles, playbooks, how it all comes together. How do you go about setting up that front end configuration? There is a lab guide for it as well. Once you complete that in a couple of days, then you go to the project and then you build the same for catalog and carts. At least for the catalog application, you should have this working. So deploy the catalog application with Ansible. You should have this part working basically, right? And that's what I want you to get to and complete for this week. And if you have done that, maybe I'll add one more step as a quiz. Once you have done that, this would show as complete, and you should be able to go to the next challenge or next mission. That's when we start building stuff on cloud. So next week, when we come back, we are going to start building things on cloud, specifically AWS. And I'll show you how to get started with it. I'm going to add more content, newer content related to that. And we'll see if we can integrate Ansible with cloud as well for the configuration part, the configuration management part. Again, are there any questions? We are reaching towards the end of the session. So I have explained to you what the mission for this week is and how do you get started with Ansible. Any of you who are watching this on a live stream and want to get started, you can join the silver membership by visiting schoolofdevops.com, and you will have access to these challenges and the missions and the hackathon here. Again, are there any questions? I think from next week onward, we're going to make it a little more interactive where you can ask questions during the session rather than waiting towards the end of it, as I started talking about at the very beginning, right? So that is how we conduct my trainings are conducted that way, where we have very interactive session. People ask questions during this live session itself. And that is what we are going to start welcoming from next week onwards. So everyone that I see here on the live session, Arun, Burli, Giri, Isidore, Michelle, Rajiv, Santosh, Subhash, Subramaniam, Tassin. Thank you very much for attending today's session. I wish you all the best, but you start working on these things as well. That's when you will actually start benefiting. While you're learning it from me every week would be good, but when you actually implement it, that's when the real magic will start happening. That's when you'll start actual learning. And all of this content is here available as part of the bootcamp, as part of you post questions on the group that we have specifically created. I would like to see more discussions here. We do have questions coming in, but definitely we would like to see more discussions here. And at the end of the missions, like mission number 10, if you complete all the missions successfully, I'm gonna give you a certification that is a certified, that will be School of DevOps certified DevOps associate, basically. So this will be, associated with a certification, and that's something I'm gonna work on. So that's why we have created this challenge, and you will end up getting a certification once you complete all the tasks. And for that, it is mandatory for you to follow this steps, basically, right? Only then, because it will be done in an automated way through our platform itself. And from this roadmap, you should have all these tasks completed, and only then will you have actual certification generated automatically for you, which you can then publish on, let's say, LinkedIn and whatnot. So that is what we are adding here to this hackathon. That's a new announcement from me. And that's what we're going to work on and comply to, right? So that will happen one mission at a time, because there are two new missions that I'm building, one for the cloud, one for the Terraform. That will happen in the next 2 weeks, basically. So this week, I want you to finish automating with Ansible, and at least try deploying these applications with Ansible. At least 2 of those, the front end and the catalog. That's what we want you to have completed. Unless there are any questions, are there any questions right now? All right. So we will close the session here. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the inner circle call on Thursday evening. And I look forward to see you in the next week's session with the new mission as well. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.